America begins its official goodbye to the 41st president. Vice President Mike Pence praising Bush's legacy, which he says will continue to inspire.
President George Herbert Walker Bush loved his family, and he served his country. Sustained him throughout his life of service.
His wife Laura, his sons, former President George W. Bush, former Florida Governor Jeb Bush, and Neil Bush, among the mourners, of course, gathered in the rotunda. The family patriarch died on Friday in Houston at the age of 94. Let's go to CTV's Richard Madan. He's standing by tonight in Washington. Richard, what was the mood like in Washington with people mourning for the past president?
Yeah, you know what struck me when we saw all these dignitaries and just the history surrounding this remarkable service was that this was a throwback to a very different, very bipartisan time and a very different Washington than what we are living in this current climate. Bush was praised by Democrats, talking about his class and how he was he would always be search for a bipartisan solution, and really elevated the office of the President of the United States. This is a time that really was captured under that era, and it was the last of this time. He presided over such a tumultuous time in world affairs, the collapse of the Soviet Union, the reunification of Germany, and there was a real sense by many that he just really didn't get the credit that he deserves because he was a one-term president. And then when his term expired, of course, we were ushered into the sort of celebrity-style politics that was ushered in by Bill Clinton, and then, of course, today with Donald Trump. Partisanship is just rampant in this city, hyper-partisan, and George W. Bush was the last of that era to really reach out beyond the aisle to find consensus. So you really got a sense that we've seen the end of a bygone era. And just put it bluntly, things that he pushed for, granting citizenship to illegal immigrants, the Republican Party now runs away from that. The Bush family name is toxic in many circles under the Trump base, and really his history and his service to the country that was celebrated and almost expected to become president of the United States, well, that really isn't as critical anymore for those people trying to reach the highest office. So really, we just caught a snapshot of a moment in time today, and it was really striking to see.
Richard, I know there will be several services in his honor. Give us an idea of what's happening the rest of the week.
Well, we saw the service today on Capitol Hill. And one thing I meant to bring up that I just found really extraordinary in just how Americans celebrate their history, that the plank that was carrying his coffin was the same plank that carried Abraham Lincoln's coffin after he was assassinated in the 1860s. So that's just remarkable that that still exists today. The funeral will be held at the National Cathedral here in Washington, and this will be the same funeral that we saw for Gerald Ford back in the mid-2000s. Dwight Eisenhower was commemorated there. So we'll see that funeral on Wednesday, and then he flies back to his final resting place in Texas. So this whole week in Washington is really going to be paying respects to the legacy and life of George H.W. Bush. One thing that I really wanted to mention today that really stood out was watching his son, former President George W. Bush, really trying to hold back tears as he stood on the steps of the Capitol and watched his father's coffin be led inside. You really didn't get to see emotion coming from President George W. Bush, but you really saw him today holding back those tears. And once again, it just brings you back to just the time of his father, George H.W. Bush, and just how different that was back then to how things are today.
Yeah, simply the son going to say goodbye to his father at this point, I guess. CTV's Richard Madan in Washington. Richard, thanks for that.
You bet.